Hi, everybody. It's Mrs. Martin. I am giving you your December book talk and excited to be here to do so. Hope you're doing well and enjoying the nice weather that we've been having. By the time you listen to this book talk, I don't know if it will still be nice, but right now it's been, kind of sunny and everything. So when I put this book talk together, I was thinking about the fact that it would probably be snowy and icy and all of that we are used to in the month of December. Not sure what it's like right now for you. Anyway, getting into books, at least it doesn't matter what the weather's like. I don't know about you. I have been struggling a little bit to find time to read just for fun these days. I've been reading, for work, which is good, and I've been reading for information, but finding time just to read for pleasure, for fun, has been a little bit more difficult. So I was thinking about that and how, especially with being at home and learning from home and working from home, some of you might also be struggling to find time to read. In thinking about that, thinking about how to develop your reading habits. Um, One thing is just having those reading materials handy. Sometimes you might have extra time on your hands, or you might be looking for something to do, and you might realize, like I do, that I'm out of books, or I don't have that next book I'm excited to read. So just keep in mind, libraries are open. Our Dakota County Library is open. Our Valley Middle School Library is open. You can be picking up books with our curbside checkout, placing books on hold with me or Mrs. Kump. You can be using your iPad and reading books using the Mac and Via app. There are lots of ways to keep reading materials handy, even if you're kind of done reading the books, at your house. So keeping a good list also of books that you're wanting to read so that you know what you want to read next. Be thinking about that as one way to develop that reading habit. Another way is to connect reading to your everyday life, and that's making it part of your daily schedule. If there's a time of day that works best for you to read for fun and making that part of the habit that you have. For me, the best time for me to read is when my family is in bed. I have two kids, and so for me, it's easier to read when everybody else is asleep. But for you, maybe it's middle of the day. Maybe you're someone who needs to find time to read in the morning before your school day starts. Find the time that works best for you and make it a part of your schedule. Thinking about your hobbies and your interests. As I'm sharing books today, some of the books might sound great, some of them not so much. Connecting things that you're interested in helps you to determine what's interesting to read about. Thinking about whether you like music or art, sports, animals, whatever it is. Reading's more interesting and satisfying when we read about topics that we care about. So consider what it is you care about and find more to read that is about those topics. Last but not least, I'm one person to get a recommendation from. Your teachers or others are some who can give you some recommendations. But your friends and classmates, the people that are your age, your peers, are really some of the best to give you recommendations. So be asking one another, what are books that you're reading? What are some of the best graphic novels? What are some of the best articles that you've read? That's the best way, I think, to get recommendations because they're going to help you find some of the best things for you that you'll find interesting to read. So those are just a couple pieces of advice as you might be finding it a struggle, either to find the time to read or just to find kind of that interest. Even if you've been a reader, it's sort of hard to drum up that interest in reading right now at home in sort of this new schedule that we're in. But I hope that one of those pieces of advice is helpful to you. Speaking of finding new things to read, we have just purchased and are now working on getting these books ready for you to check out. They should be ready in the next week or so, probably right before winter break. We ordered a bunch of books through the Scholastic Book Fair that was online. These are just a few of those books that we ordered. And so if there were books through the book fair that you were hoping to check out, these are a few of them. There will be more. Be sure to check back on the library catalog. because we'll have them listed on that top banner that's changing all the time with books. Mrs. Kump and I will be adding those to the top to let you know what books are available for checkout. And then you can put those books on hold and be maybe even the first student to read some of the brand new books that we're adding to our collection. There were a lot of really good ones. And I'm grateful to those of you that offered up suggestions as well for books that we should add to the library. So today, Miss Simser asked if I would share stories that were refugee stories. And the 5 books I'm going to share with you this morning are all fictional stories, but some might be based on some truth. So there might be some stories here where the author has used some of their own personal experience in a memoir-like fashion to write their fictional story. This first book is called Ask Me No Questions, and our author Marina Budos has written a realistic fiction story about Nadira and her older sister and their father. And there are others in the family involved in the story, but it's really the 3 of them at kind of the heart of this book. Nadira and her family are illegal aliens, and they have fled to the Canadian border. They've immigrated from Bangladesh many years before, and they've been living on expired visas in New York City ever since. They've hoped for many years that they could become legal citizens of the United States, and they've lived in the US for a while on these expired visas. They've lived in New York City, just kind of hoping and waiting to become legal citizens of the US, and hoping that that would happen. However, after 9/11, September 11th, and the terrorist attacks that occurred there, suddenly for Nadira and her family, becoming Muslim means being dangerous. And this was not true for her family before. All of a sudden, people are looking at her differently and looking at her family differently. They are seeing them as suspected terrorists simply because they're Muslim. When Nadira's father is arrested in the story and detained at the border, Nadira and her older sister, Aisha, are sent back to Queens, and they're told to act as though everything is the same. They're told to just carry on like there's nothing happening, like her dad hasn't been arrested. But of course, nothing's the same. Nadira and Aisha are afraid they're going to have to return to Bangladesh. And they don't really know anything about Bangladesh. They haven't been there in years, right? They've lived most of their lives in America. It's up to Nadira in this story to find a way to kind of bring her family back together. So this story, Ask Me No Questions, is realistic fiction, and it can be found in our library. You could, again, like any book in our library, simply place it on hold using our catalog system. And if you have any questions about how to do that, you can let me know through messaging me or Mrs. Kump on Schoology. We'd be happy to help you. Our second story is a graphic novel titled Illegal by Ian Colfer and Andrew Duncan. And we're going to hear from Andrew in a short little interview clip here in just a moment about his experience in creating this book. This is a story of brothers, but it's central to Ibo's story, journeying from Africa to Europe, and his hope, not only with his brother, but himself, trying to reunite with his sister. So I'm going to let the author tell you mostly about this story. He's going to talk a little bit about the illustrations in this book and the writing of the story. Let's take a look.
Hello, my name is Andrew Donkin. I'm with the lovely Owen Colfer, Mr. Artemis Fowl himself. I'm the co-author of Illegal, a new graphic novel from ourselves, and Giovanni Rigano, our lovely, fantastic Italian artist who has drawn such lovely spreads as this one. And the lovely people at Source Books who are bringing this out in America have asked me just to pop up and just say to you that this has been a real labour of love for the 3 of us. For the last 4 years we started work on this, and it's taken an awful lot of research and an awful lot of blood, sweat and tears to get it to you in this lovely form of hardback and paperback. It tells the story of 2 brothers economic migrants who decide to travel from Ghana up through Africa, across the Mediterranean. They get involved with people traffickers who take them across the Sahara Desert. This was a book that we've done the most research for out of any book we've ever written to get it as true to life as we absolutely could. And the main message of our book, if it had a message, was that every single one, when you see these pictures of people and you see these pictures of boats like this, cathedral boats packed with people, every single dot on there and every single one of those people, every single little face there is a human being and is a person just like me and just like you. And we tried to take one of those people, Ebu, and tell his story in this book. I hope that you'll read it, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
I hope you'll enjoy that one in the graphic novel section. Take a look at that book. A third story to consider, it's an older book in the collection, but a really neat one called Little Crickets by Jackie Brown. It's set in the 1970s, but it starts in Laos and moves us all the way into St. Paul, Minnesota. So, kind of neat that it brings us to a setting that we're all familiar with here. It is the story of a girl named Kaya, who's 12, and she's nicknamed Little Cricket, which is the reason for the name of the story. And she's always lived with her extended family in a tiny village in Laos. But one day there are soldiers who come in to the village, destroying most of it, and as a result, her family has to leave because a war is going to take place right there, and her family has to escape to be safe. There are 3 years that her family then spends in a Thai refugee camp, right, to stay safe and to stay together. And after those 3 years, they receive some really pretty sad news, actually. And it's that only Kaya and her brother ZG and their grandfather may immigrate to America. The rest of them are not able to go. And so that's really hard, the fact that her family has to be broken apart. She's lived with so many of them, and now only the 3 of them can go. When they arrive, it's in Minnesota that she and her grandpa and brother moved to, and she's really overwhelmed when she gets there. Everything is very different culturally. The language is different. So that's overwhelming in and of itself. Not to mention that she's left so much of her family behind. And then ZG gets into a great deal of trouble once arriving in Minnesota, and her grandpa becomes ill. So Little Cricket, our main character, is really kind of fumbling, doesn't know how she's going to manage because she feels very, very alone. The 2 people that she has brought with her that have come along, she isn't feeling she can depend upon. And she doesn't feel that she has people there in Minnesota because things are new to her and the language and cultural barriers are so great that she doesn't feel that she has the connections. What's really kind of cool about this story, though, is the way that Little Cricket does find community, does find neighbors, friends, people who begin to surround her. She discovers that there is a community here in Minnesota who are here for her. And the more that she allows herself to rely on them, the more that people really support her and her family. So this story is, though set back in the 1970s, right before any of you were alive, this story really, I think, rings true to the idea of community and how people can come together when someone is in trouble. And what a human story that is, no matter what time period we're talking about. So, Little Cricket by Jackie Brown. This is a pretty short story as well. It's a pretty small book, pretty quick read. This one many of you may have already read, but I couldn't help but throw it on because it is one of my favorite books of all time by Alan Gratz, Refugee. And this story takes place in 3 different time periods with 3 different characters in 3 different locations. It's the story of Joseph, who is living in 1930s Nazi Germany. He's Jewish. There are concentration camps. looming, and he and his family decide to board a ship to head to the other side of the world in order to escape being caught up in those concentration camps during World War II. Isabel is a Cuban girl in 1994, and there are riots and war taking place in her country, so her family leaves on a raft and they hope to find safety in America. And Mahmoud is a Syrian boy in 2015, and his homeland is being torn apart by violence and war, and his family begins a long trek to Europe. All three of these children, you have the chapters alternating here. So we get one chapter about Joseph, and then one chapter about Isabel, and then one chapter about Mahmoud, and then we come back to Joseph again. And all three of these kids are escaping their country. They're leaving their homeland to find refuge somewhere else. They have that in common. And even though they're separated by continents and they're separated by decades, there are some connections that are going to bring their stories together and tie them together in the end, which is such a neat thing about the way the story is written. You're going to fall in love with these characters and fall in love with this book. If you've not yet read it, please pick this one up, Refugee by Alan Gratz. And this last one is right up there with one of my favorites as well. I'm not going to say much about it because the author in this video, and it's about 3 minutes long, does such a cool job of showing you the inspiration for this story. It's the story of two boys who don't know each other at the beginning, but form a friendship. 14-year-old Ahmed has fled from Syria and has lost his father on the journey from Syria to Belgium. He's got no one now that he's arrived in Belgium. Max is 13. He's an American boy from Washington, D.C., who has moved with his family to Belgium to go to school. And he's struggling at the new school and can't seem to do anything right, and he hates being there. He's homesick and feels worthless. And when Ahmed and Max meet, it's just an incredible thing. I'm going to let Catherine Marsh, the author of the book, tell you about her book, Nowhere Boy.
Et je dirais du buveur l'épopée, l'œil toujours clos si le vin est cuvé.
Oh, hey, it's you. Come on in. I have something really cool I want to show you. It's downstairs, this way. I'm Catherine Marsh, and in the summer of 2015, I moved with my entire family, and I mean everyone. My husband, my two kids, my 80-something-year-old mother, the cat.
Not the chickens.
Okay, not the chickens. We had to leave them behind in Washington, D.C. because of livestock laws, but pretty much everyone else moved to Brussels, Belgium with me. And we ended up renting this amazing old house built in 1906. The coolest thing of all was behind this little door in the basement. You may have to duck. We are going down to the sub-basement. This is the actual wine cellar that inspired Nowhere Boy. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I started to wonder what would it be like for a kid to hide out here, especially after I heard the true story of another boy who hid out on this very block. His name was Ralph Mayer. He was a Jewish teenager, a refugee from Nazi Germany. In 1942, a Belgian lawyer named Albert Genard and his family hid Ralph here in their house, just a few doors down from our own. A neighbor betrayed them, and one June morning in 1943, the Gestapo pounded on their door. Ralph, who was in an upstairs bedroom, ran out of the window and over the roofs. As you can see, it's possible, though I won't demonstrate because I'm afraid of heights. In fact, Shushu will demonstrate for you. Nowhere Boy isn't just about Ralph. It's also about two other boys, a Syrian refugee named Ahmed and an American expat named Max. Max's parents send him to the local French school, École du Bonheur, or the School of Happiness. It's a pretty unhappy experience, though, for Max, especially in the beginning when he doesn't speak much French. I should know. I sent my children to the real École de Bonheur. During the Brussels terror attacks, I ran over to the school to pick up my kids. I ended up talking about that experience on the Today Show. But this wasn't the only major news event that made its way into the book. The summer of 2015, when we moved to Brussels, was the height of the refugee crisis. The majority of refugees were escaping war and conflict in Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Many of them found themselves camping out here in Park Maximilian. In the beginning of Nowhere Boy, Ahmed also finds himself here. The last place I'd like to share with you is our garden. The garden plays a really special role in Nowhere Boy. One night, Ahmed finds himself here, and he's in trouble. Ahmed is an unaccompanied minor, meaning he's a child who's traveled the refugee route alone, without his parents. Ahmed tries this door, but you'll have to read Nowhere Boy to find out what happens next. This is not what happens next. Hi, Ellie. But we had to work our Belgian chickens into this somehow. Au revoir! Je n'ai pas peur, même pas du docteur.
Nowhere Boy is a fantastic read. I can't recommend it enough, and I hope that you'll give it a try. Thanks so much for your attention during this book talk. As always, I hope that you're staying well and that you'll reach out if you have any questions or need some recommendations. And in the meantime, happy reading.